Hey everybody, welcome in again to another episode of the Voice of Camp Nathanael, Stephen Bell, and with me, as always, is...
So used to you having a word right now. This is Lee Sharp, guys.
Hey, what were you expecting?
I was expecting a word that I've never heard before in my life.
I do not have an adjective, but I do have a noun that I want to ask you a question about.
A noun. Okay, what have you got?
Would you consider yourself a hobbledehoy? Just answer yes or no first.
I want to go with yes.
Okay, it's an awkward teenager. At one time in your life,
A hobbledehoy.
it said hobbledehoy.
What century is this word from?
I don't know.
And what dusty text did you pull that out of?
Guys, you have got the Voice of Camp Nathanael coming at you from the campus of Camp Nathanael, and this is part 4 of the series that we're in. This is the second one in a row. We did the first 2 back in June, and now we've once again got Mr. Roy Hodson in the studio with us as we look at part 4 of the history of Camp Nathanael. And Roy, welcome back once again.
Well, it's good to be here, guys.
You're like you have the most, aside from me and Lee, I think you've been on the program more than anyone.
Oh, well, great.
See, look at that.
When do I get my residuals?
Well, I can't promise you anything there. Roy, we have been talking, you've taken us through from the beginning of camp in 1932, and we are quickly approaching in just a few years here the 100th anniversary of Camp Nathanael, which is just crazy to think about. And the last episode, we were talking about some specific ministries that took place here, probably from the mid 40s, right around 1950 up until we talked about some that are still going present day. And I know you had said you got maybe a couple of more that we want to hit on there, and then we're going to hear some stories of just kind of how the property developed and stuff along those lines, right?
Yeah, you were talking about the 100th anniversary. It reminds me back in 1972 when it was the 40th anniversary. They had this big blowout. You were talking a couple of times about hearing Mr. Franklin speak at that thing, and they put together a big anniversary book. It was multiple pages with pictures, a big picture book. And 10 years later, it was the 50th. And we all decided that those that were there for the 40th didn't think they were going to live to the 50th. So they had this big blowout at the 40th. Just in case. 10 years later, just in case. Because we come up on the 50th and what do we do to top the 40th? You know? So then we spread it out. 75 was the next one.
Okay, all right. So, but a little safer at that point.
Over the past few weeks, I've been working with Nathan Keeney and even Daniel's son. We've been doing some clean out from some different things just around campus and putting old things out and just getting all that sort of stuff. And the conversation will always circle back to, at least this will probably be for the next few years, are we going to need that for the 100th?
Well, yeah, I can see why.
There's been a lot of time, like, we got to hold on to that. We got to keep that for the 100th. And so that's always running in the back of your mind as you're cleaning and you're putting things away because you never want to accidentally throw something away that.
Well, and that's very true. And much of what I know is because they didn't throw stuff away.
Yeah,
there was a lot of stuff that they probably could have eliminated, but I'm thankful they didn't eliminate all of it.
Yeah.
Whether it be pictures.
We haven't thrown anything important away. I'll throw that out.
So there is, to some degree, some justifiable reason for hoarding at some point, right?
Well, a minimalist hoarding.
A minimalist hoarding, yes.
We're very selective in our things, but like we were up in the attic the other day, and I think I found and it may have been used at one of the other anniversary events, but it's this giant poster of like the history of camp, and it's got all these different colors on it and what. And I was like, this is really cool. We need to get this thing out and look at. So, there you go. At the 100, in a few years, we may be dragging that out again just to see.
I think that was done at the 75th. I'm not for sure. I do remember that. And my memory serves me correct. I think Barb Plitt did a lot of that work. I could be wrong on that one, but yeah, it had pictures and had timelines of different aspects of the ministry, when things started, when different.
And it's neat when you're digging around and you're trying to see, what's you're up in the the attic of the chapel, and you never know what you're going to find.
That's right.
You're like, oh, what? This is a whole history of camp up here.
Yeah, exactly. And it was, hopefully it's still some of that there. It's well out of the floodplain.
Right, right.
But yeah, we were talking last time about some of the ministry aspects of Scripture Memory Mountain Mission and Camp Nathanael. And there's a couple of things that I wanted to just start with today. And one of it is, I mentioned Paul Smith last time helping to start the high school ministry, but Paul and his family lived in what's called Squabble Creek, which is over near Buckhorn. And he wrote an article in the Light in the Hills way back, this would have been probably in the early 50s. And he made a comment there that I wrote down. I'd like to read it just because it has had a profound impact on my ministry. And this is what he said. He said, more and more we realize that in our particular field, talking about that area of Perry County, it's the living rather than the preaching of the word that these people need. Outstanding among the various activities that community life brings to us is home visitation. Did you know there was a sitting ministry? SITTING.
Sitting, just going to people's
Sitting.
houses and sitting,
He said
sitting
there
with them.
is.
Is that it?
That's exactly it. He
Wow.
said, we gain confidence and trust of the folks by sitting with them in times of trouble, times of illness, etc. And, you know, so often we get so wrapped up in doing ministry that we fail to sit.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody has had a crisis in their life, and we all have, we all remember the person who came and sat.
That's true.
And didn't try to fix it, but just sat and listened, every now and then said something, you know, kind of like some of Job's good friends.
Or as we were talking about at Stephen, as we were talking at church just this past Wednesday, as we were reading through James, be quick to hear.
Yeah. Slow to speak.
Which, you know, essentially comes down to sit down and listen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because in the years since we've retired from the mission, as Debbie and I have been involved with more counseling individually and in group settings with those in rehab and things, drug recovery and things, we have found that that is one of the greatest opportunities because so many times people just don't have time to listen.
Yeah.
And there's some people that just need to get something out. And so
That's right.
So Paul, you know, had that sitting ministry that was so effective and impactful on my life, even years and years later. But the other thing that has always impressed me about this ministry is it has always been, and Mr. Haddix, my predecessor, pointed this out to me, and I began to observe it myself, has always been a ministry of preparation.
Mm-hmm.
I have lost count of how many folks who came here, served 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and then God moved them into a different ministry, a whole different continent. You know, one of the ones that I always like to tell, because some people can identify with it, is I think back in June, we were talking about the stained glass windows here. We were talking about the Saint family. And, of course, any of us, my generation, remember the Alka Indian incident with Nate Saint and Ed McCulley. But one of the ones that was killed in that was a man named Peter Udarian. And he's kind of one of the lesser known ones. Well, years later, Elizabeth Elliott, who was
Jim Elliott's
widow, was doing a radio program, a national radio program through Back to the Bible, and she had on, it was around the anniversary year of one of those, of that incident, and she had on one of the other widows, a lady named Barbara Udarian. Well, as Barbara was telling her story of how she met her husband, how they ended up in Ecuador before the death. She said, I served a summer at a place called Camp Nathanael in eastern Kentucky.
What?
And it was at Camp Nathanael that I got my call to missions.
No way.
Okay? I wasn't listening. A friend of ours in Pennsylvania was listening. As soon as that happened, she sent us an email. Are you aware of this? I said, no. But
no way.
But again, Barbara Udarian was here for one summer, but God got a hold of her life, and we know what happened.
Wow.
We actually had her come back and speak one time after we learned that, and she came and shared some of that with us as a group. But it's those kind of things. Ralph and Lila Bauer were here in Leslie County for probably 20 years, maybe not quite 20, and ended up going to Trinidad for another 30. A lady who worked with Debbie and I in Harlan County, her name was Ellen Wheeler at the time. She left, met her husband, and ended up with in Kenya for years. So it's been an opportunity for people to prepare themselves for some other type of ministry, and I think that's a role that the mission has had over the years. So,
man, that's incredible. We always talk about the ties that people share with this place.
Yeah.
But man, when you start thinking about just how far-reaching the impact that the Holy Spirit has had through this ministry, when we say worldwide, I mean we're not exaggerating. It is pretty amazing what God has done.
Sometimes it feels like that somebody might hear that and it feels like, oh, you're embellishing a little bit. It's like, I'm actually not. There's been times where you're on the other side of the world and you get into a conversation with and this is how it typically happens. It's always we were starting there and we were talking, and then somebody was talking about growing up, and then Camp Nathanael gets mentioned, and all of a sudden it's, wait, you went there too? Or, oh, wait, I know, that's my cousin.
Well, it's a real quick story on that kind of thing. It wasn't actually a missionary, but I was on the phone with a freight dispatcher in Wisconsin one time, tracking down, when we were building the gym, tracking down some equipment that was being shipped from up that way. And she said, well, where do we need to ship it to? And I began to describe, I said, well, we're 125 miles southeast of Lexington, et cetera, et cetera. She goes, now where was that? And I said, well, the nearest town is a place called Hazard. And she goes, okay. So I kind of grew up there. So it's actually Camp Nathanael. And this woman broke into, we've come to Camp Nathanael. She started singing me the theme song. Turns out she came as a camper and relocated that direction.
Wow.
But it's, I always told the staff, you better watch how you behave wherever you are.
Wherever you're at.
Whether it's Walmart in Hazard or Chicago, because somebody might know you.
And there's stories that go, I mean, there was not quite as far, but before coming here, me and my wife, we lived up in Lexington, and which, again, isn't too far away. But there was a point where we were coming down, and I had the Camp Nathanael shirt on, and we were in, it was like Chick-fil-A or something like that. And we got stopped by some random couple that I've never met in my life. And she goes, is that the Camp Nathanael down near Hazard or something? I was like, yeah. And she goes, well, I've never been there. She goes, I've never been there. She goes, but my mother has told me all about it.
Oh, wow.
And almost every one of her childhood stories involves camp somehow. And I'm just like,
that's really cool.
And it's the effect of not just the people that have been directly, but it's the children of the people that have been directly.
Well, I've got one more for you, Lee.
What you got?
A lady who grew up in Hardburley, her mother was in the hospital in Richmond, Patty Clay Hospital. And there was a nurse's aide, a black lady, would come in every day, and every day she was either humming a hymn, or she would tell her mother, I got a Bible verse for you today. Mm-hmm. So the adult daughter, was there one day when this lady came in, and they began to talk, and she said, you know an awful lot of Bible verses. She said, yeah. She said, when I was growing up in Harlan County, I used to say Bible verses to Roy and Debbie Hodson, and I went to Camp Nathanael. Well, this lady had been a camper when she was at Hardburley. Uh-huh. And so here again, Martina was that lady's name. Very humble lady, worked as a nurse's aide, but she had a ministry in every room that she went into because of the verses she memorized as a child and came to camp.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And so, the ripple effect is just it is worldwide.
Yeah.
And it is far-reaching without any embellishment.
Yeah.
The Holy Spirit is the one doing the
That's right.
embellishment.
The embellishment.
That's right. So we've kind of come to the point to where we're in the second half of our episode now. When camp started, when they bought this property, because it started in Leslie County, right?
Correct.
And they spent 2 years over in Leslie County. Am I right on that?
Correct. They had one summer over there.
One summer over there.
Right.
And then they came over
To this property in 34.
in 34. And you were telling us before we went on the air here that the camp property at the time was 66 acres.
Correct, when they first bought it.
And it has grown a little bit.
Yeah, just a little.
It's around 500 now.
Around 500 acres of land now that belongs to Camp Nathanael. So Roy, I mean, you're around for a lot of this expansion here. So kind of tell us, fill us in on what all's happened here.
Well, it is incredible when you think about it. To start with that 66 acres, which was bought for $5,000. And then in the early 60s, there was another part of that Mosley farm had been bought by somebody else. And the landowner of that wanted to log it. And so he made a proposal to the leadership. We weren't here at the time, that if you will let me log your 66 acres, the hillside, not the whole property,
Right.
I will give you the 120 acres that I have after it's logged. So they swapped the timber on Camp 66 acres for the 120, which brought it up to 200. This would have been in the 60s. About that same time, they built 3 new cabins, all in one off-season. Bonaire, Hawaii, and Trinidad were all built at that same time.
So I'll ask real quick here. The naming of the cabins.
Correct.
How do some of them get their? How did they get
all
their
of
names?
them up to, I don't know what it is now, all of them were named after mission fields of individuals who either had been campers here, like we were talking about.
So the couple from that went to Trinidad.
Correct. That actually started, was called Rhodesia originally. But when Rhodesia became Zimbabwe, they decided to change it to Trinidad.
There you go.
Or a missionary speaker had been here at about that time. Cuba was named after, with connection with a missionary who had been ministering in Cuba. A Cuban individual, actually. I'm drawing a blank on his name. Peru was actually named because a former camper, Hetty Begley was her maiden name. She married a Lorio. Hetty Begley was almost one of the original Wycliffe missionaries.
Oh, wow.
And she ended up marrying Jim, her husband, and they were in Peru as linguists for many, many years. So Hetty was probably one of the first campers who went into mission service in a full-time way. But she was with, was it Cam Townsend, the founder? She was of his generation and was one of the very earliest Wycliffe. So that's where
I was distracted there. I was just curious.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because I never knew that. I don't know how many people know that, but yeah, I'm glad you said that. Now we were talking about this. The guy who did the logging, got the property. Was that the property on the other side of Troublesome? No, we're not there yet?
We're not there yet.
Okay,
that's just up the left-hand side of Old House Branch, as we call it. And so that's where it was. In the meantime, in the early 50s, the original swimming pool where the picnic shelter is now it was the only in-ground pool in Knott County for decades.
Wow. Until
the 60s, I think, as far as any size. So a lot of people, I don't know how many adults told me the reason they came to camp was to be in the swimming pool. But some of them, the Lord got a hold of at the same time. So kind of that was kind of where we were. And then we were talking about the printing press and all of that in VBS last time. They were outgrowing the 2 wings of the chapel, which is where the offices were. And so instead of building an office building, I'm not sure who came with the idea. I think probably Mr. Haddix. He said, let's build a new dining room and take the old dining room, which is the basement of the chapel, and make it the offices. So that was the impetus in the early 70s, mid-70s, for the original Bethlehem dining room, which was then expanded later.
Right.
But so they built a new dining room and then moved all the offices to the lower level. But they had pretty much built everything they could build space-wise on this side of the creek, of Troublesome Creek. And they didn't want to obviously build in the field out in the middle, but there was need for things. So as we were all thinking about that, praying about that, the family that owned the other side, the Combs family, it was in heirs. The parents had died, and I don't know all the family dynamics of it, but we were approached by the two heirs who had control of the property, had bought out everybody else, and wanted to know if we would be interested in buying it. Well, as we discussed it, the price was $250,000 for about 250 acres. Okay, which is $1,000 an acre. For those of you who've been here, $1,000 an acre on average, as much bottom land as we call it as it was there. You know, somebody in the leadership said, you know, we can't afford not to. But in keeping with the no loan aspect of it, we had to come up with $250,000 to do this. Well, I don't remember all the details of that particular purchase, but God did it.
Yeah.
And so, and I remember being stopped in one of the stores in Hyman after that, and word had gotten out that Camp had bought that from the Combs family. And the guy said to me, how did you get that? I said, well, they came to us, you know, and we were able to purchase it. He said, well, I know they were offered a lot of money by developers who wanted to put a development, kind of like Simeon Fields development, I guess. I don't know who the people were.
Right.
And they wouldn't sell it. And so I remember talking to Mr. Franklin, who was still living at the time. He said, Roy, I often dreamed of having that side of the creek. And so he got to see the fact that it did become part of camp. And so then once that happened, then the expansion in that direction began.
And for those of you listening, we're talking about the area where obviously the pool is now, the gym is now, the campsites, the horse barn, all of that down that way.
There was two houses, the White House up on the hill, and then what used to be called the Red House. I'm not sure what it's called now. It has the garage doors underneath, garage underneath. Anyway, that was the only two buildings over there.
Yeah.
So then the first thing we did as an organization, we put the swimming pool in over there. Well, we put the bridge in.
Oh, yeah.
The bridge went in first. Quick story. A former camper had a steel fabricating business in Indianapolis. I don't know who put us in touch. Mr. Haddix knew the man. I called him. He said, yeah, we can do the I-beams. And so we ordered them, expecting to pay for them, of course. And he said they're getting ready to ship. So the only way, because that ground did not have roads or anything, we had to bring it in the wintertime when it was frozen so the truck wouldn't get mired up.
So, wow, okay.
So the short story was it came early one morning, had a crane here to offload them, and they got the truck out. And the guy I called him, I said, the steel's on the ground, it's here. He said, well, I've been talking to my partners, and we'll just donate the steel. I don't remember what the price was. So that's the first thing. And then the pool came. The state said our pool, the old pool, was not up to standards as far as the circulation, the purification. So to upgrade that pool to the standards was 2/3 the cost of a new pool.
Yeah.
So that was the next thing. Again, God brought a contractor out of Cincinnati, an unsaved man who brought his crew in here, but Don Jordan was the head of facilities or maintenance at that point. And he spoke to the man and said, this is a Christian organization. We would like your guys to behave themselves. And while they were, so the guy who was not a believer, told his crew, watch your language, watch what you do, all the rest. And they did. While that guy was here, this contractor, Don was a great personal witness. He kept sharing the gospel with this guy. Before that project was done, Don led that contractor to the Lord.
Man, that's great.
And then several months later, maybe it was 6 months to a year later, we were having an issue with something there with the pool. I can't remember exactly what it was. So I called the company, found out that man had died of a heart attack 6 months after he accepted Christ.
Wow.
So that was the swimming pool. Then we began the duplexes, I think, were next. And again, all of this was cash only.
Yeah, and that's still happening today.
Oh, I know.
I mean, it's mind-boggling if you think, and I don't know how many people listen know this, but camp has never, in the whole history of camp being an organization, has never went in debt, correct?
Never been in debt.
Never been in debt. So until before anything is built on campus, we have the money for it first, and God has always provided,
or at least enough. As Mr. Hags taught me, he said we need to have at least enough to get it to a place where you're not going to lose your investment.
Right, right.
Get it under roof, get it weathered in, get it to whatever before you can begin.
In other words, be a good steward with,
Exactly.
with what you've got.
And every time God paid for it as either through donated labor. You know, one of the duplexes we put up in 1 week one year. I mean, we just had teams come in. Same thing when we built the gym. You know, the original budget for the gym was $125,000. It ballooned to about $225,000 because we got almost 3 times the building from what the original. I don't know if it's still around. I had the original drawing of the gym on a little piece of graph paper. But the gym was the first building that we had to have an architect because of the size and state regulations and things like that. But the mission had always brought together, tried to have good relationships with the health department, with all these people.
Right.
Yeah.
So Don Jordan, in one of his strokes of genius, asked the building inspector to come in before we did one thing, said, let's go over these plans. You tell us how we want to do it, and we will build it just like that. Because we had heard this guy was a bear. He had literally locked the church up in Floyd County because they weren't following code. But anyway, and so we did. Never had a problem with it. And God, again, supplied. And we didn't have a big mailing list like we were talking back in June. A foundation in Michigan said, we'll do a matching grant of $40,000, 2 for 1. So if you can raise $20,000, we'll give you $40.
Oh, wow.
$2 match.
Okay.
So we sent out one letter in September. By November, we had our part. I remember calling the foundation and talking to the office manager lady, and she said, wow, you must have really had a fundraising program or something. I forget what her words were. I said, no. I said, we sent one mailing out, and God took care of it. That project, like I said, was $225,000, something like that. The average gift on that project was $125.
Wow.
One lady literally taped 2 quarters to an index card and mailed it to us. So again, just how God pays for it in advance.
That's right.
You know, when it came to expanding the dining room, Bethlehem, and we added the whole lower part there.
Yeah.
Again, same building inspector.
Oh, yeah.
We had some issues getting everything approved out of Frankfurt, and so we had a crew schedule. We were laying block, I think, and I get a call here at the office and said the building inspector's down here and he'd like to talk to you. Well, we didn't have our approved sealed plans yet, stamp plans they call it. So I walked down there, dreading this. He rolls the window down. He says, "Hi, Roy." He said, "See, you got a pretty good start here. Here are your plans. Just keep going." Never, because several years before, Don Jordan had laid the foundation. Again, God anticipated what our needs were.
That's right.
We had a couple of really sticky things there with that plan to meet the code. He was willing to work around those things. and just God just, again, it's amazing to see how God just opens up opportunities. I forget, I used to know the number, how many volunteer hours were in the dining room. Virtually that building was all done, particularly expansion, with volunteers.
Wow.
When we were setting the large trusses, they were 50-foot trusses. We had a crane in here. That morning, the weather forecast was awful. It was raining, actually, when they came, thunderstorm. It was in the spring. And the guy with the boom truck said, we can't set up as long as it's thunder. So we waited. It quit raining. The guy who actually had the company, he went to check on a project in Hazard, came back after lunch, and we had the volunteers pretty much had the trusses all up. He said, how'd you guys get that done? He said, well, we just did. He said, everywhere I've been today, it was pouring the rain. And once that guy left here, it didn't rain again until after they got that all done. I mean, you can't make that stuff up.
No, you can't.
You can't make that
You
stuff.
can't.
And again, it's, yes, God controlled the weather. Yes, God controls the resources. Yes, God controls the manpower. He has, unlimited, talk about the cattle on 1,000 hills.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
It is what it is.
And, over the years, as we said before, we see the faithfulness of God. We trust in the faithfulness of God currently because we've seen the faithfulness of God in the past. Yeah. And because he's a God who does not change, he will continually be faithful to his people. So we got just a couple of minutes here to get ready to wrap things up. Roy, anything to add here at the end?
Well, again, this ministry has always been God's. It was never Garland Franklin's. He never had that attitude. He had a lot of good ideas and got good support. I'll never forget one more quick story about him.
Yeah.
When he was notorious or famous, whichever word you want to use, for writing handwritten several pages of suggestions. And so when I became mission director, I said, Mr. Franklin, I said, you can always send me your suggestions. I will always read them, but I won't necessarily commit to always doing them. And he understood that, but but it wasn't his, it wasn't Mr. Haddock's, it wasn't mine. We're only on, this ministry is almost 100 years old, and we're only on our fifth director in 100 years.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And Josh was here for a relatively short period of time. Mr. Franklin here was here for 20 plus years. Mr. Haddock's was director for 20 plus years. I was here for almost 30 years as director.
Wow.
And now with Jeff. So, and Josh and Jeff are the most recent one. But yeah, and that stability, is not just in that leadership position, but, most folks come and stay.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They're here for a while. So. Well, hey, speaking of staying, here in a few years, when we hit 100 years, we'll do another episode of the podcast.
All right, we'll do that. Maybe we'll have to do one before that.
Oh, I'm sure we'll do one before. I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but anyway, it's been great being with you guys and kind of reminiscing about the impact that God has had on this ministry.
Well, brother, I appreciate you. I know you and I have had many talks outside of this ministry and whatnot, but I appreciate everything that you and your wife Debbie have done, not just for this ministry, but for the community. And your family is very precious to us. And man, it's been a joy just to sit down and get to, like I said, reminisce with you and just see the faithfulness of God. So appreciate you, brother.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
Roy, I called you Roy. So I was just talking to Roy. So Lee,
Hey,
there are worse things to be called.
all right, hobbledehoy. Oh man, guys, it's November.
November.
We're approaching Thanksgiving very quickly, and that means Christmas is right around the corner. Lee's been listening to Christmas music since like September at this point. Come on.
Okay, it's true.
I made you raise your hand in church on Sunday and admit it. All right, guys, you all have a great week, and we'll be back with you next time right here on the Voice of Camp. Nathanael.
Yeah, thanks, guys.